Hi there, and welcome back for episode 9 of The Real on Real Estate with the Northwest Home Experts Real Estate Team. I am your host, Kelly, and today I am joined by Joe Symonette and Brandon Stevens. Thank you guys for being here.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad. I can't believe you guys are already on episode 9. That's really cool.
Yeah, we're cruising on these.
Yeah.
It's going by really fast.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited that Northwest Home Experts team invited me in here to discuss what we're going over today.
Yeah.
Yes, because
Very
it's a
important
huge
topic
in the real estate industry right now. Huge, like my friends that aren't even in real estate are reaching out, asking me questions, and I'm like, you guys, this isn't.
It's a good discussion, and I think it'll provide a lot of people just clarity to what's going on.
Exactly. So no, enough ambiguity. We are continuing the conversation that Charlie and I had last week on the NAR settlement, and it's going to be a great conversation. So why don't we just dive right on in, you guys?
The elephant in the room.
Yes.
Let's go.
Staying in the room.
Let's go.
So if you guys have seen a lot of the headlines splashed all over the news, and they're very misleading to consumers and agents as well.
Yep.
Everyone's a little bit confused. The settlement supposedly is going to force brokers to reduce their compensation. What are your guys' thoughts on this? What's actually happening?
So yeah, I mean, really, it's very unclear on what the settlement actually is, because number one, it's not even finalized at this point. So that's the first thing. So people, and especially people in the media and stuff, I mean, I've seen a lot of headlines, and unfortunately, the headlines can be confusing, especially to consumers, right? And so commissions, they've always been negotiable. With your broker is totally negotiable. So it really doesn't have any effect on that. This whole thing was about disclosure. And so what that meant is that there's certain MLSs that are tied to the National Association of Realtors. Our MLS is not one of them, but those MLSs basically had the seller had to put in a certain amount of compensation, whether it be $1 to buyer's agent. And so that's what this whole thing was about, and changing that rule, which in 2019, the Northwest MLS, we were the first MLS in the whole United States to actually change that, where seller does not have to pay compensation if they don't want to. So that's what this is really about. It's really about disclosure, but it's not really about commissions getting lowered or anything, because there's so many models out there, right?
Yeah.
There's models where sellers could list their home for free on places like Zillow, or you could pay $500 and use a limited service broker. Or even if you're a buyer, you know, there's certain buyer's agents or discount buyer's agents that would do it for a flat fee, or write an offer for a fee, or even attorney. So, I mean, there's always been all of these options out there. So that's what it's kind of confusing people, because there's never been a ceiling on any type of compensation, since it's always negotiable.
Well, certainly what we're dealing with is the sensationalism of the media.
Yeah.
And when they announced this decision, you know, the media decided to run with it as the death of the 6% commission, which really basically portrayed it that was the commission that everybody was paying, and you didn't have a choice, which is a falsehood. We all know that, especially here in Washington State, and we can't really speak for other MLSs across the nation, but we certainly have had that option, like Joe was saying, that commissions have always been negotiable here in Washington State. Yes, the industry standard is 6% to list your home, and those can be negotiated, and typically those are co-brokered splits. So what happens is you list your home, you have a 6% commission, but what essentially you do is you split that commission, the listing agent does, with a co-brokered agent. Yep. And that's where the 6% comes in. So essentially the way the seller looks at it is they're paying the buyer's agent, but really they're not. They're paying their listing agent, who's in fact actually splitting it with that agent.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It is. So there's just so many ways you can work a deal.
Yeah.
And so that part gets so, there's no black and white way to cut the anything, as I have learned in real estate. And so I guess for someone that's not in real estate, they can kind of equate it to tipping at a restaurant, right? Like the industry standard is 20% across the board, but that doesn't mean you're obligated to give that 20%.
It's a very good analogy.
It's just what's like quote unquote kind of the norm.
Yeah, it's the standard.
Yeah, or customary, whatever. But yeah, I mean, there's always been options out there.
Exactly.
For clients and for sellers, and
it's always been one of the first questions that we get. So it's funny to me that the media was able to run with that, because, you know, typically people want to know, what do you charge?
Yeah.
If it was 6%, then why would I always get that question?
Right. Absolutely.
Right? So,
absolutely. Okay. So you guys, let's go on to question number 2, because I think this is one that so many different ways, and it's a huge issue that the United States is facing right now, and that's housing affordability.
Sure.
So as many of us have seen in the news, the settlement will help houses be more affordable.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a complete falsehood, because we know that housing prices aren't dictated by commissions. First of all, housing prices are typically dictated by supply and demand issues, as most things are in the economy, right?
Exactly.
We know that because we remember things going scarce in COVID. Toilet paper, hand sanitizer, those things, of course, went up. Gasoline, right? Though that fluctuates based on usage. Well, it's no different for housing supply. And unfortunately, we've been in a housing supply crunch for years and years.
Yeah.
And the problem is we don't foresee that ending. Right. So, and I think Joe will probably elaborate a little bit more on how it actually affects prices.
Yeah.
But what we do need to understand is housing prices are dictated on supply and demand, really.
Yeah, commission really, when you're talking housing prices, really, I mean, and I feel bad and concerned just for the public, because everything's getting more expensive. Like, we see that, and especially housing is getting more expensive, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one is basically for a 10-year period from starting in 2008, like, there was no homes. This is nationwide. There was not any homes built because we had an oversupply for so long. And then you have to catch up to that, and that takes years after having basically almost a decade where they didn't build homes.
Right.
Then you have something like COVID happen, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens there, that halts any production, right? And then you have high inflation. So what that does for builders is that makes costs of borrowing and building even more expensive, materials and all that. That gets passed on to the consumer. So unfortunately, commissions really don't have much to do with those things. And really, it's, if we go down to like distill this just to local areas, it really goes towards things like, if we look at permits and impact fees.
Yeah.
Like here, it's on average between $40,000 or $50,000 before you even break ground on a house.
Right.
And so if they do want to make homes more affordable, then there needs to be some types of subsidy, to promote, if you're trying to do affordable or middle income. So you promote that. But what's been happening, unfortunately, is that they want to continue to raise those fees. And so unfortunately, a builder that's in business, they have to pass those fees on. It's not a nonprofit.
Right.
So they have to stay in business. And so everything continues to get more expensive. And I mean, they're trying to come up with solutions, but I mean, commissions, if those were taken out of the equation, they did some numbers on that, and a $500,000 house might be worth around $495 at that. So it's really a moot point when it comes to that, when it's more just accumulation of the things that I just went through that really they don't really talk about with the general public. And it's like, these are conversations that we really need to have with our local politicians and stuff like that, because it's like, you can't continue to pass on the buck and then say, hey, we need affordable housing, but you have to make some type of grants. Those are federal grants, if those are state grants, local city grants, and certain type of programs, so developers can actually help and actually contribute, if it's a percentage of a project or whatever, to make it more affordable.
So certainly commissions feel like the lowest hanging fruit.
Easiest target.
Easiest target when it comes to affordability.
Yeah.
But if you dive a little deeper into Joe's scenario here, say a commission was reduced down to 1% on the buyer's agent side, around $5,000 on a $500,000 house, equating that house to now, in theory, be $495,000. But as a seller, ask yourself this: is my house still worth $500,000, or is it now worth $495,000? Well, I'm sure if you ask the seller, they're going to say my house is worth $500,000. The price didn't change of the house.
Correct.
Essentially, maybe the net profits could change, the net proceeds, as we would put it in real estate, but the price and affordability of housing really is not affected at all. And I think the deeper problem exists certainly in what Joe's talking about, in the supply chain issues, whether it's permitting, cost of housing, and building costs. The market prices are dictated regardless of, what the commissions are. You
Correct.
can ask any brand new home builder that here.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do feel like the media kind of made real estate agents the scapegoat of what is happening with the affordability.
Yeah.
And just kind of placed it on, hey, we're going to take those compensations away and it's going to reduce all of this. And when you tell a nation that, they kind of ban on that and say, yeah, that sounds great, let's do that, not realizing how deep this issue is.
Yeah, people are really angry, and I feel that, because like my concern is for, a family that's aspiring to get into home ownership, and when they're angry because they're starting to see that dream slip away, and when they really don't have the media outlets actually educating on why this is really happening, they want to place that anger somewhere. And I understand that, because like Brandon, he came from a single mom household, and so did I. And so it's like you're trying to work your way up, right, and you get to a point where you're almost there, and you're continuing to see these costs rise. So it's like those damn agents, they're
they're the problem.
They're the ones that are making this so damn expensive.
And as a content creator, whether it's on my YouTube channel or Instagram videos, a lot of the people are downright frustrated, and the people that comment, they don't feel like they're being heard. So they actually would wish that home prices would collapse, that other people's home ownership dreams,
I hear that all the time,
could get destroyed. So it's certainly the dream of home ownership is certainly, the gap is widening on who can and cannot buy a house. This, which we can talk about, is actually going to make it worse.
Yes.
For affordability, for people achieving home ownership.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on forever, but ultimately this could be really bad for our country as well. We won't go down that route because we just don't have time for that today.
No. Yeah.
But I agree. And also, it's hard because what's the American dream?
You just want to own a slice.
Yeah.
That's all we're here.
Right.
It's like we just want to own this little slice of the pie.
Yep.
And we just want our little piece. That's all we ask for. It's not a lot to ask for.
No.
Because there's a lot of it, but as that gap widens and the people that, and we're lucky we've gotten into home ownership.
Yeah.
And sometimes I look back and I'm like, man, I feel very fortunate to have accomplished that goal, because it feels like it's getting further and further out of reach.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think here collectively, as in being in real estate and real estate agents, we empathize, we understand what's going on out there. We're not here to just take all your money. We realize the problem. And
if you're in real estate, your why should be a couple of reasons, but one of the main reasons should be helping other people achieve that goal of home ownership. Is one of the best feelings you get as a real estate agent.
Yes, 100%.
Accomplishing a transaction with somebody who may have never thought, I could really never thought I would be able to accomplish owning a home. Brandon, thank you so much. Yeah. And that's what we hear time and time again. But it looks like, with settlements and stuff like this, the narrative can be a little bit shifty on us.
Yeah, a little bit. That's for sure. Okay, you guys, there's something interesting talking about consumers as we have. I want to kind of shift this now to this point where the settlement will result in significant restitution to consumers who were quote unquote harmed over the years in their transactions by realtors. This headline is completely false. Yeah. Can you guys explain why? Or how, or what's going on there?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if any of you guys have gotten one of those checks from a class action lawsuit.
I have. I always get them like randomly, and they're great.
You were part of this class action lawsuit, and it's like maybe like $1 or so.
Yeah.
And so they did the math, and basically anybody that are filed to be involved in it, their settlement check will be like $10. Yeah. So really, the big winners here, unfortunately, are the attorneys.
Yeah.
So far, I think they've submitted around $80 million for claims of getting paid fees for litigating these cases. So, but nobody's asking the attorneys, well, why are you charging so much?
Yeah.
And those questions. So, I mean, I kind of saw this from the jump that this is a really easy payday for attorneys because of how some of these MLSs were basically, directing basically seller agents, listing brokers to have to abide by these rules that are kind of archaic and antiquated. So it's really one of those things that the attorneys, they're going to run away with. I mean, when this is all said and done, because again, it's not over. And so let's keep on telling the public that, because this thing has not been settled out, they're going to run away with hundreds of millions of dollars. The homeowners or buyers that are involved in these suits, they're going to look at their check and they're going to be like, this is all I got out of this whole thing. And then I feel like there's going to be more frustration because this is my time. This is why everything's so expensive. This is why housing's so expensive. And they're not going to still feel validated.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate that not everybody in the media is telling the full story.
Well, I'm all for a big corporation who's been wronging a consumer for many years, and I might join a class action lawsuit to get my $1.50 just to have had my say in the fact that, hey, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't do that with, maybe it's AT&T or, T-Mobile or whatever, these large,
or Apple, who they're going after
or
now.
Apple. But what you have to understand, real estate agents are, for the most part, small businesses.
Sole proprietors.
We're small businesses. We work for ourselves. We are forced to hang our real estate license at a brokerage where we choose to, basically have our business. But when it comes down to it, our business is our brand and our name. So we are licensed at eXp Realty, but you're Northwest Home Experts.
Yep.
That's your brand.
Yep.
That's who supports your family. So, it's almost like you're going after the wrong, you might feel like you're getting a big piece of that lawsuit and you're taking down the man, but really we're all just small businesses just like you. We go to work every day and work hard.
Right.
So there may be that kind of that's probably something that a lot of people don't understand, because they're likely seeing real estate agents on the internet looking like they're big gazillionaires every day. Or watching or
Ryan Serhant $1 million listing.
Or whatever
and they're like, wait a second, I don't care about that guy. And I'll be honest,
screw that guy.
I'll take his money. It's like,
selling on Sunset $1 million listing. Josh Altman, all those guys. And I mean, if we look at it, and this is another thing that's not really stated, but I want to say last year the average real estate agent made $43,000. That was what the average agent made. And so that's actually less than a teacher.
Oh, yeah.
The teacher that makes a salary. So, but again, it's kind of like sensationalized headlines, and everybody's like, those damn greedy realtors. Look at Josh Altman and his Rolls Royce, or Ryan Serhant in New York with his chauffeur, and so unfortunately people don't tell that part of the story, or that the business is super hard, and that's why 90% of the agents that get in this business actually fail and get out. Yeah. It's unfortunate, but I understand why there's so much frustration.
Right. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you guys have just pointed out that it is we are all just small pieces of a bigger puzzle.
Yeah.
That's really all what agents are. Yeah. So that brings me to my next topic then, where this settlement, they are saying, is going to prohibit sellers from paying a commission to a buyer's agent, which will then relieve sellers from a financial burden. So let's go back to the whole compensation and paying agents. We have kind of touched on this has already happened with the Northwest MLS. Yep. Just talk about that a little bit more and how it's kind of worked here in Washington.
Sure. You want me
to
go
take
first?
That one.
Yeah. So it's we've gone to that since 2019 here in Washington, but like Brandon was saying, or he was talking about co-brokers, or what we would like to say, or what I like to say to homeowners, is selling real estate, it's typically a cooperative business. And what that means is we're cooperating with other agents. 80% of the time there's going to be a buyer's agent that represents their buyer that's going to bring an offer to the table. It's not going to be me, finding that buyer, because we put it in the multiple listings, like the Northwest MLS, that is not owned by NAR. Ours is owned by all of the firms as a co-op. And so we put it in there for cooperation, and a seller basically can pay compensation if they want, but that's going to give them more exposure because agents are paid only by commission. They're not paid by eXp. We don't get a W-2. We're all 1099 independent contractors. They're paid 100% on commission. And so that's why they offer compensation. But they haven't had to offer compensation here since 2019, but most sellers still do, because again, we're talking about market fundamentals, supply and demand. Yeah. If you want the most exposure on your property, you probably want the most agents out there trying to bring a buyer. Right. But they don't have to. If a seller wants, I don't want to pay buyer's compensation, they don't have to. So they have that option, they have that right, and I think that's great. Again, these are all just market fundamentals, and it's capitalism at its finest. And also, that doesn't mean that seller might not pay compensation. It's just like they're saying, hey, I don't want to. But it's kind of like for sale by owners, which I've worked a ton over my last 19 years, where I've had many of them where I brought a client to the house, showed it, and they said, hey, I don't want to pay your compensation. But then we give them a really great offer and they're willing to pay it. So again, real estate, just like any other business, it's typically free market and it's a negotiation, right?
Yeah.
And if both parties feel like it's a fair deal, then they're going to move forward.
Well, and we don't know exactly how this shakes out yet.
Yeah.
But essentially what this settlement is dictating is
the seller can advertise concessions, but those concessions could be used for agent compensation, closing costs, etc., allowable fees, title escrow, whatever, lender fees. But again, that's just making what I think the public wants is basically transparency. I think that's making it again kind of like this backroom deal thing where then, buyer's agent and listing broker are on the phone going back and forth. And so I think it's going to have an adverse effect on what they're wanting. And then also we haven't even talked about yet, right? Let's say seller doesn't want to pay compensation, right? But there's some buyers out there, if they're an FHA buyer or a VA buyer, they cannot pay their buyer agent compensation because of the loan. These are certain underwriting guidelines and loan terms in these loans. And so then you're talking about opening up a new can of worms where this could become discrimination to certain groups.
Buyers, right? Yeah.
Yeah, to certain groups. And so I'm like, this might open up a whole new can of worms. And then you're talking about another class action suit. Right. So I understand what they're trying to do. And that's why we were talking about this morning on our team huddle, that the Northwest MLS actually on the 27th of March interjected to have basically the settlement reopened so they could make some statements.
The whole NAR settlement?
Yeah, so they could they could make some statements, because back in 2020, Department of Justice started. They were actually quoted on record that they wanted the other MLSs to go the route of what has happened in the Northwest MLS, where our compensation on the buyer side can be transparent in any public actual portals like Zillow, Realtor.com, where the buyer and the buyer agent can see it. So it'd at least be everybody would know what it is. And then also it would basically discourage steering, those type of things, because everybody knows what's going on.
Right.
Where now what they're talking about makes it more vague and just kind of like a very gray area where I'm like, I don't know if this is going to be such a good thing. We'll see here. So, I mean, it's kind of like they're really beating this thing to a pulp, and it might actually not turn out for the best, because now there's going to be these new can of worms that are going to pop up that they haven't even thought of.
Well, another can that I came across this week was, I'm a referral partner for a large discount brokerage in the area that's the color of an apple. And, before and Joe could certainly elaborate on this, they did not allow dual agency for their sellers. So for their listing agents. So basically what that means is, if you were the listing agent and you had a property listed, a buyer came to you and said, I want to buy this property. Well, a buyer needs representation.
Correct.
And that's what a buyer broker does. And the reason that they need representation, because it has a ton of repercussions legally, and it's a huge transaction, and there's a lot of ins and outs that a lot of people just don't know. It's a huge transaction. But because of this NAR settlement, Redfin decided, well, we will allow dual agency, essentially, because they have to tackle the fact that a lot of their money comes off of either their buyer's agents or their referral fees. So and I'm sure they receive a ton of foot traffic off their website of listings that are anybody's. And so they will now say, I will represent both parties. Now, ideally sounds really hairy, because you as a buyer would have no person to basically represent you and get your back in this transaction. So this is something I don't think anybody's even really heard of. And it's not something I really prefer to do anyways. I don't see that is the word I'm looking for is, it's not legal. Fair. It's not fair to, it's just not fair to represent both sides. You can't do that responsibly, because it's hard to make the negotiations fair for both sides.
Yeah. You can't have somebody's best interest if you're
best interest, yes,
representing both sides. And that'd be like an analogy. If you are going to court, and you don't have an attorney, right? And you're allowing basically the prosecution
Precisely.
or prosecutor to represent you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you think they have your best interest?
No.
And so this can go a lot of ways, and also it can open up a lot of litigation, because the thing is, anybody can file a lawsuit for anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And real estate is such a big, complex transaction with disclosures, with timelines, contractual obligations, that if a seller is representing a buyer as well, and one of those two parties, and it could all close, you don't hear anything, guess what? It could, somebody that's not happy in a year from now, they find something wrong, like you're going to court, you're going to be involved in that. And between the costs of, retainers, and a lot of times the cases get settled out, it's going to probably cost you more in time, anxiety, and money than actually paying to have representation.
Yeah.
And also, with buying a expensive item like a home, it could literally cost them thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars if certain things are not disclosed correctly, if somebody's doing dual agency.
So
and that's why I don't do it.
as a seller, if you decide that you don't want to offer buyer broker commission, and you're going to likely have to allow for your listing broker to offer dual agency, or that the buyer may be unrepresented, which may be even worse.
Yeah.
If you save $10,000 on commission, but you look forward down the road, and the litigation is likely going to be far more than the commission you thought you saved.
Yeah.
On that.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like we opened a lot more can of worms with this, so I'm excited to
10.
see. Yeah,
we can do one once we actually get the final settlement, and we can call that the FUD episode: fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Yes, I love that.
We can do our own sensationalize of headline.
Fear everybody.
It's the only way you get somebody's attention.
Yeah. So I guess what I learned today is that, like, transparency is out the door.
It feels like it. But again,
disclosure, not a thing anymore.
We don't know how it shakes out yet.
Yeah, it's still hasn't been finalized, and that's what the general public should know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so all these headlines flying around, like, it's kind of like the media doesn't even know what's finalized yet. Nobody knows. So don't take what you're hearing for the gospel by any means.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you guys, is there anything that you think we have missed today?
I would say one other thing that I think that we should definitely talk about is does this benefit buyers?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of going to be questionable, because before, most of the time seller would cover compensation. And now with buyers, most buyers, they're scraping every penny they have to purchase a home. And so for them to come up with down payment, closing costs, moving costs, inspection fees, appraisals, and all of those costs, and now having to try to pay buyer agent compensation, I feel like the dream of home ownership might be slipping away even further because of this. Because if we look at kind of the way it was set up, and again, there's many different models as we talked about, but the way that was set up, where basically buyer had that taken care of, which was quite nice, right? Because they're already trying to scrape every dollar they have to make this happen together. And then when they sell the house, right, they have to pay. But it was kind of a balancing of the scales. Right?
Sure. Well, and this is definitely going to take away from affordability if now they have to come up with an extra $15,000.
Yeah.
Well,
right?
there's also that debate. The commission was based on the price of the house.
Yeah.
And so who's paying the commission? Well, you would say the seller is paying the commission, but the buyer is paying the purchase price of the house.
Right.
Chicken and egg.
Right.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, when seller goes to buy another house, now they have to pay a buyer's commission, or are they going to want the seller to pay for that? It's full circle. It is.
Yeah. So this could be debated and talked about, but really, like the way I think it will all work out is the market will decide what happens, and people will have time once the dust settles, and once we actually know the new rules of the game, and everybody has options, and I think they should be educated on all the options they have, and they should also work with somebody that they think is going to be a great fit with them, And I'm a true believer in you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
So just make sure whoever you're working with, that they're educated and they really know a lot about what they're doing. Because, I mean, for most people, this is their largest financial purchase.
Yeah.
And so this isn't, I mean, I take this very seriously because of that. Like,
Yeah.
you're playing with people's lives here.
Right.
So, yeah, we'll see where this ends up. But, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the market will continue.
Yeah.
And people are going to continue to need help as there's so many different scenarios, from traditional transactions to new construction to investment side, and also distressed sales, which we're starting to see kind of pop back up again. So end of the day, business will continue to move forward.
I'll just end on
Market's not
saying
stopping.
this. I do think, I don't want to underplay this lawsuit at all.
Yeah.
I do think this changes things.
Yeah.
We don't know good or bad, and I'm 100% with Joe that the industry itself will all work itself out. The way that it falls. You know, we are still going to be here to add value. I think that's the most important thing when you're, you know, working with a real estate agent, is what value do they bring?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the headlines, basically, they look at real estate agents as people that just open doors because they can find the house.
Yeah.
The internet made that possible.
Right.
So what do you need me for?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's our job to, you know, provide that information for you. It's not your job to purchase a house without having any guidance.
Yeah.
You need to understand what our value is and what we provide. And it is very much more than opening doors. So
Yeah, that's probably like the smallest part of the equation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
and we could have
fraction.
we should actually have an episode just about the complexities, and we could talk about different stories, because like I have a gazillion of stories, just like, you know, and even people that have done things like private party that then reach out to me for help because like there's stuff that's popped up that they don't know how to handle.
Right. Just the deadlines alone. Just
So-
to keep everything in order.
it's all
Yeah.
very, very murky stuff.
So yeah, and again, I mean, that's why I'm like, if it's easy, anybody can do it. And that's why we have such a high failure rate, because this business is anything but easy.
No, it's not easy at all.
Certainly a real estate transaction is just like a snowflake. Everyone is different. The people are different. The prices are different. The contingencies are different. The contracts are different. The areas are different.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm 100% on board with what you have said right there.
Yeah.
So I guess going back to what you had talked about with the buyers, now I guess like the talk of them paying their compensation, they're part of the compensation. Northwest, I feel like MLS has, we've already talked about that. They kind of opened the door, but this year we introduced the Form 41.
Yep.
So that's a great conversation as well now for buyers, agents, and buyers to start.
Yeah. I think the Northwest MLS has really been kind of the most.
They've been spearheading.
They've been spearheading. They've also been the innovator of all of this, and buyer brokerage representation nationally is going to become a thing in July per where the settlement is at right now, but we've already had that since the beginning of this year. And I think again, this is like transparency and disclosure of having that conversation with your client, letting them know the options ahead of time. So it's not where they get to the closing table and you're like, hey, you have to pay X. And they're like, well, nobody told me that. You know? So no, I think this is all working out the way it should be. And the agents that actually provide a lot of value, they're going to be able to command whatever they're asking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the agents that aren't, then this is probably a time where we'll see them exit the door.
Yeah. Okay. Well, any final thoughts, you guys?
That's really it
in a nutshell.
Okay.
I can't wait to see how this all shakes out. So
I know.
Be ready for more, and it's exciting times.
Yeah, we'll have part 2 and part 3
This was part 2.
or part 3 until this actually gets finalized. So, but I would just tell the general public, if you do have questions, reach out to any real estate professional, and they'll probably be able to give you a lot more depth and context to this other than just what you're seeing on the media. And I've already been having lots of these questions because I generally meet with sellers, and I meet with 3 sellers last weekend, and I explained it. And they're like, "Oh, okay, well, that makes sense." And and everything, the sky didn't fall, so
right,
it's totally fine.
it's just like having those conversations make a huge deal. Well,
Yeah.
you guys, thank you for being here. I feel like we provided just a ton of value today.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
the main thing that I think we can all take away from this is be careful what you hear, what you read,
That's it.
what your friends tell you. If you are in the home buying process, make sure to find an expert. You guys can find us at nwhomeexperts.com. Where can they find you, Brandon?
And you can find me at Premier Homes Northwest on Instagram, Brandon_Stevens, PHNW, or on YouTube at Living in Olympia-Lacey-Tumwater.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll be around and we're going to continue to be around. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to answer them.
Yeah, and thank you guys for joining me on episode 9 of The Real on Real Estate. If you guys are watching on YouTube, make sure you hit subscribe. If you're listening on any podcast platform, go ahead and follow us, and we will see you in 2 more weeks.
Good job.